Good morning, everybody. This is episode 1 of The Main Loop, casual conversation about games, design, development, and the fun that can be had from playing a good video game. My name is Sean Bragg. I'm joined, of course, by the fair and lovely Stuart Urbach.
That's one way of putting it.
Yeah, I think. Well, you shaved your mustache, so we can call you fair and lovely again.
I think we're all happy about that.
It's working out very well for everybody, I would say. This is our first episode. We're going to try to take a look at games and the gaming industry from a perspective of two guys who like to obsess over the science of having fun. In this first episode, we want to spend most of our time talking about an interview with Todd Howard, the creator of Skyrim and a bigwig over at Bethesda Game. Are they Bethesda GameWorks, Game Studios?
Something like that. I think everyone just calls them Bethesda. So
Bethesda. It always sounds like you're mispronouncing it, like Bethesda, but that is.
I also always think about like the CIA. So
Bethesda. So Stuart linked me to this great interview over on Glixel, which we will have for you all. With Todd Howard, talking about things like what's it like to create Skyrim and Fallout 4 and Fallout 3 and these kind of games. But he also had a lot to talk about the Nintendo Switch, which we're all excited about. So I think it's best if we just jump right in and talk about this interview.
Yeah, let's go for it. I mean, so first off, I think we should probably preface by what the heck Glixel is.
What, you've never had a Glixel? Oh, Stu, I lost you.
Am I still here?
Now you are, yeah.
Okay. Apparently our internet is shoddier than I'd hoped. Startup culture. So I learned about Glixel in probably the most pretentious way possible. So I was listening to a podcast and about sports, and the podcaster had a friend who was basically a journalist who also talked about games a lot. And so they have a podcast called Shall We Play a Game? And in that podcast, I learned that Rolling Stone was coming out with their own wing for games called Glixel. And that's sort of the birth of Glixel. It's this Rolling Stone adventure to try to take that sort of journalist style and apply it to video games. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, so this is actually a Rolling Stone brand.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So I think that's kind of the theme we're going to see is a lot of these types of personal interviews with game designers and what they think about the industry and everything.
Yeah. That's cool.
So I'm kind of excited. It's a different take than just the let's rate this game, because I'm kind of tired of that sort of view on games. But
no, that's really cool, and it's really cool to see a bigger player in the publication and the journalism space moving on to games. We've had The Verge, but that's they're tied to some bigger organizations, but they're still kind of a startup. When then they have Pixel, but this is really cool to see an actual I didn't know this was Rolling Stone's magazine, so this is really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it takes off. It's pretty damn recent, so.
Yeah, well, I think, and that format, the Rolling Stone format of we're going to actually talk to a producer or an artist about not just the thing that they made. It's not just promo, but it's actually about the process. That's a lot more interesting, I think, for a lot of people. So.
Yeah, so digging right into this interview, I kind of just want to talk about the Switch off the bat. I was shocked, actually, that he took such a positive view on the Switch and was really excited about it.
Yeah, he's very excited about the Switch in this interview.
And it seemed to be that wasn't just his personal opinion. It was a pretty widespread opinion. And I was really surprised because it seemed like VR and AR were the hot new stuff, and the Switch was kind of that typical Nintendo thing that we're 10 years behind. But in this case, unlike the Wii U, which was just an iPad strapped to the Wii, people seem really excited about this. So I'd love to hear what you think about why that is and what that means for Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited when I saw that first Switch promo video that they released, because you know, from a gaming standpoint, I was a Nintendo guy through the GameCube, and then less and less of my friends had Nintendo stuff, and then the bigger games were no longer coming out for Nintendo platforms. I mean, the GameCube got a few big releases, but for the most part, it was, you know, the sort of Nintendo only stuff. And there were a lot of great games. I mean, there were phenomenal games on the GameCube. It's still one of my favorite systems. But, you know, it took a while for the Wii to land, and then the Wii was this weird thing. It was this thing that everybody had. It was a lot of fun to play, but it was really based on novelty. And then that, of course, meant that you're really not getting the big developers making games, or if they are, they're trying to... I remember trying to play one of the Call of Duties, and it had this horrible, like, you use the handle to try to turn the Jeep, and it was just, it was terrible because the motion controls just weren't suited for that. And I think we saw that. I mean, PlayStation tried motion controls, and, you know, the Kinect is cool, but it wasn't as big a deal as people still wanted to play games with a controller. And so, and the Wii U, I've played the Wii U. It's got some phenomenal games on it, and they look great. They're finally in HD. But it was still very much, it felt more in the camp of, well, we're sort of trying this weirder stuff. And then the Switch, I don't know, it looks like, you know, they're really trying to make it a major player, but they're still doing the Nintendo thing, right? It's going to have its weird little spin on it, which in this case is the thing is actually portable. And the console itself is the thing that you pick up and take with you, which is, I think, really cool. So, I mean, the fact that they've got developers like Bethesda excited about it, it was what makes me the most excited about it, that there's third parties coming along. And what I've seen so far, it doesn't look like they're doing really this weird, oh, but you play just by moving your body, or it's all motion controls. Like, it's physical controllers that, yeah, they do cool things with the multiplayer, but it's really based around that more traditional gaming experience.
It seems like they might be trying to reach out to more of the... It seems like they might be trying to reach out to more of the actual developer crowd with this release, given that Bethesda hadn't actually put anything on the Wii or even the GameCube. Because I noticed that with the Wii U launch especially, where it was like, oh, there are like a few big games that are accessible, but like all of the innovations in like developer support were coming from PlayStation and a little bit from Xbox, and Wii was just falling behind, and that was like a major hit. I'm also really excited about the whole like detachable controller, being able to play multiplayer on the go with it. That seems really interesting to me, where it's like, oh, I actually have a reason to move it portably instead of just like I'm in a weird commercial and walking my dog while having this weird like thing strapped to my hands.
Yeah, I mean, I think about when you wanted to show me Mario Kart 8, so you brought your Wii U over. But what a pain in the ass that is to like get everything set up and get the controllers paired, and oh, we don't have batteries for it, and it's still dependent on being able to hook it up to my TV, and the fact that, yeah, you just pick it up and here, hand me a little controller. I just want to remark about how much I love that they made it symmetrical. If you detach the controllers and turn them, like everyone's going to have a joystick on the left and 4 buttons on the right.
Yeah.
Like there's these little like those kind of like almost artistic flourishes that are just, they're very Nintendo, and it makes me really, really excited to actually get my hands on it. Well, let's talk more
in a weird way.
Oh,
yeah. No, go ahead.
Well, let's talk more about what Todd Howard had to say about the Switch. I've got the quotes that I grabbed here. So in this interview, they asked him, "What do you think of the Switch?" And he said, "I love it. I got to play it. I will tell you, well, maybe that's an NDA thing, one of the best demos I've ever seen. Probably the best demo I've ever seen at E3. And they said, was it a Nintendo game? He said, no, I mean the device itself. I think it's really smart what they're doing. We're definitely going to be supporting it. It's the first time we've done something on Nintendo, if you don't count the old NES stuff, Home Alone or Where's Waldo, which is, it's funny that he mentioned those because those are horrible games."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously demoing at E3 is kind of a low bar, in my opinion, just because E3 is already this massive conglomeration of just like a bunch of random sales pitches. But I think it's a really good sign that a developer is excited about a Nintendo thing, just because I hadn't heard that even about the Wii. Like, everyone's like, yeah, the Wii is cool, but it was kind of Nintendo going into its own shell, and having someone who is also really excited about VR. Like the next 3 questions in this interview, they're talking about like putting Fallout 4 in VR. At the same time, they're really excited about exploring the Switch. I think that's a really good sign because it shows that developers will still be attracted to it, even though it's not like the new VR stuff, that it can still be competitive on the actual developer side.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, too, in like the demo videos of the Switch, they're docking it in that thing so that you plug it into your TV. Like, I don't think I'm crazy to think that in a couple years we see like the Switch VR, that it's a new thing that you dock it into, that maybe it has like an integrated GPU in this dock, and then you can play VR games on it, because it's already got the detachable wireless controller things that are perfect for that. So, yeah, what you said struck me about Nintendo going into its own shell with the Wii, because I definitely think that's what drove the developer community away from them was for a while. It felt like they just kind of, in some ways, went off the rails and just were really doing their own thing. I mean, I think we may find out that that's what saved the company, because they sold they sold 1 trillion Wii units, and pretty much everybody had one. Your grandma had one. It became almost this like appliance, and maybe that's what they needed to sort of weather the storm until they could really get back into being Nintendo, being the company that people wanted to develop for. Not that they've ever really been that developer friendly. I mean, you look at the cartridge stuff in the 80s and 90s and all the things they did to drive developers away, but it seems like the time is right now. Especially, I was talking to somebody about the fact that it runs SD cards. So from a developer standpoint, I put my game in, and the publisher has to spend 8 cents to get 6 million SD cards manufactured and get these files put on, versus buying.
Expensive.
What's that?
I don't know, Sean. That sounds pretty expensive to me.
Steep. It is steep. So
0.0001 cent per SD cartridge. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So going back to what he had to say about the Switch, just the fact that they're on board. And I meant to pull up, there was a list of all the developers that had already said that they were on board with the Switch. I keep wanting to call it the Wii Switch, and it's not the Wii Switch. It's just the Switch. But I mean, it's pretty much everyone you can think of. I mean, EA is on board, Epic's on board, Take-Two, Double Fine, even like some of these even smaller companies that have kind of made it big. So it could be, I mean, Nintendo might come back.
I'm really hopeful because I loved the games that were available on the Wii U. Like, Super Mario World was incredible.
Yeah.
I'm playing through Yoshi's Yarn right now, and it's just really fun. It's really nice. Mario Kart 8 is like gorgeous and incredible. Like, there were so many awesome games that Nintendo produced that I feel like just missed the light of day because people were like, well, I don't want to spend $300 for like 4 games. Right, exactly. If I could do that and play Skyrim, for example, I'd be all over it. But I think that's been one of the keys to Nintendo, though, I think, staying afloat. And I think this is how they're going to win so many people back when the Switch comes out. Is, yeah, you're going to be able to play your Skyrims and your Fallouts and whatever your new, depressing, post-apocalyptic, everything is horrible game is going to be. But Nintendo, that's never been their jam, right? They've never made the game that's about you versus the world and your dog gets eaten and all that stuff, right? They've always been the fun company. They want to make games that are enjoyable to play, that's an enjoyable experience. And I think they're really poised if they can win over the quote unquote more hardcore crowd by having these big developers putting their AAA titles on the Switch. Oh, and then by the way, we've also got the Mario games that you've been missing, and we've got Metroid that you've been missing, and we have Zelda. Like, don't you wish you could play Zelda? With the dog. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you don't think we're going to see Pokemon 15, The Apocalypse, ever?
Yeah, Pokemon gets real dark there. Real dark.
I think the other thing that at least I'm imagining with the Switch, and we can probably switch off this soon.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Is that, is Pokemon going to come to it one day? I mean, I know 3DS is like a pretty awesome platform, but now that it's portable, they've always kind of kept Pokemon on the portable side. Is this like an area where they see that merge happening, and eventually 5 years down the road, Pokemon comes over to the Switch and you can play it portably and on your, I just kind of wonder if we're getting to the point where that's merging together.
Yeah, I wonder too if we'll see a point where they just say, you know what, the Switch can play 3DS games because they're on an SD card, right? The Switch, it has 3DS emulation built in, because then, the concern is like cannibalization within your own product line. But you'll always have this differentiator of, well, the 3DS can only play 3DS games. So that's why you spend, it's $150 for a 3DS. But the Switch, that's like, I'm being the 14-year-old pitching to mom and dad why they should buy him the Switch. Like, it's economic because I can actually play all of these two kinds of games on the Switch versus on the 3DS I can only play this one kind of game. That's really cheap.
Right, for sure. Cool. So Todd Howard definitely talked about a few other things. We should probably talk about those too. Is there anything you wanted to bring up specifically?
Yeah, I had a few things in this interview that stuck out to me. They talked a lot about, obviously, Skyrim, because it's one of the biggest games of all time. And the interviewer said, that Skyrim was, quote, this tipping point, and it seemed to hit an audience that had never been hit before. And they asked Todd if this kind of changed how they thought about games, what their approach, and his response was that it didn't change us, but it made us more aware that some of the things we do speak to people who don't traditionally play games or don't traditionally play role-playing games. And that just stuck out to me because I think as any kind of developer, really any creative pursuit, it's so easy to get locked into, well, this is my shtick, this is the audience I'm going after, and I'm just focused on that. And then for this guy to come along and like for Bethesda to realize, wow, a lot of people playing Skyrim aren't people who played Oblivion or Morrowind or any other big, they didn't play Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale and these big RPGs of the past, but there's something that drew them to this game, and we got to find a way to capitalize on that, which I think they did with, I've played the remastered version, and you just want to wander around for a few hours because it just looks so good, and it's just so fun to actually be in the environment.
Sorry, you saying remastered version just made me think about how in 10 years it's going to be like the Star Wars originals, where they're like, no, I want the original, not remastered, like Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah, it's like all the people who clamor at Blizzard because they want to play vanilla World of Warcraft. They don't want any of the advances we've made over the last 10 years. No,
I want it pixelated, not 8-bit, just fully pixelated.
And everything should take 6 hours to do.
Yeah. I want my connection to drop at the worst times, like just all of that.
Loading screens. Make loading screens great again.
But back to Skyrim, I was really interested in the idea that the tone was such a big deal, and that like the Conan action figure was something he kept coming back to, and that like
he said that's like their design document.
Yeah, exactly, and that was like executing on an idea that's that straightforward and not trying to like write out, okay, this is what we're trying to do, and here's like a 10-page document, and like these are things to think about.
Right.
I think that really speaks to like what you said about this is something that a lot of other people are interested in because they were creating something that was more relatable than just those systems, because each of those like design systems related to Conan. It was like, okay, does this thing relate to Conan? And it clearly gave the designers a good sort of guiding star to like aim towards, because instead of like asking a question about like, what about the balance, blah, 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 you could always come back to, okay, does this match the tone of Conan? And if it didn't, you had a good case to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important.
Yeah, that's something I've learned as a songwriter and doing music. That's an approach I like to take as well. Is when you're focused on, say you're going to write a sad song, and so you kind of can just focus on that feeling that you're going to try to kind of evoke in people, and it's way easier to get people to like your song because they like sad songs or because they felt that particular way, and so you sort of you provided a product that they were able to relate to in that way. Is a really fun way to approach it versus I just want to write a song about this particular topic. And applied to games, I love that idea that we're starting with the feel. Because again, for Skyrim, if you market it to people who aren't role-playing game people and think that RPG people are weird, it's hard to get them to bite, right? It's hard to get them to go, oh yeah, I want to play an RPG because I have so many. What? No, I don't want to roll dice and all this stuff. But if you're like, but do you want to be in this kind of medieval world where you're part of this long lost race of people who can talk to dragons, and all of a sudden people are like, whoa, 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 I can talk to dragons in this game? Like, go on. I'm very interested in what you have to say all of a sudden.
Yeah, and that actually makes me think about. So Richard Garfield is the designer of Magic: The Gathering, the card game, and
Dick
he always
Garf.
talks.
Dick Garf is what I call him when we go golfing.
And he always talked about how there has to be some level of absurdity in games, and it's not just about like this sort of pure polish, and that being able to like do something that's crazy. So he in Magic he talked about like how they had these elephants, but then they had these cards that made them fly, so you could like make an elephant fly, which was just like absurd. And like
right.
What you said about talking to dragons is like, yeah, it's cool, but it's also just like unrealistic in the biggest possible sense, not just because like dragons don't exist, also just because like I'm this random dude that's like in a world with dragons and I'm talking to them. It's just like getting to play out these weird little moments, I think, are what make games so special. It's not just like, oh, I get to do this thing or I get to be competitive. It's like just that random stuff that happens that you get to laugh about and talk to your friends about. That's like really exciting.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that like Skyrim really executed on well.
Yeah, well, and this is something C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and his famous space trilogy. He was very big on the idea that fantasy stories, he writes them because they're true. And they're not true in the pragmatic sense, but they're true in the metaphysical sense. Like they're actually the most true things in the world. When you play Skyrim and you fight giant spiders that are terrifying, well, that's actually a true story because we live in a world where spiders are real and spiders scare us. It's just sort of blown up. And the good news is you get to defeat the evil spiders, right? Or whatever horror you think is lying under your bed, video games offer you this chance to go face those evils, but you actually get to overcome them. That was Lewis's thing. Is people said, well, you shouldn't write fairy tales because children shouldn't read them because they'll believe in dragons. And he said, well, actually, I think they need to believe in dragons, and I write fairy tales so that they'll know that dragons can be defeated. Like that's the most important part of a fairy tale is learning that the dragon can be slain. And so in something like Skyrim, I think it attracts people not just because it's a fun game, but because it's actually this chance to sort of live out these underlying sort of metaphysical realities about life as a person in a world that has spiders and snakes and fire and hurricanes and things like that, in a way that's much more, you get to slay the dragons or ride them or join forces with them or install a mod where you can make them burn down villages or... So yeah, it's this living out of this drama that I think a lot of people like and miss out on. Especially when we live in a pretty pragmatic society that's always, what's the practical value? It's like, well, there's no practical value to going and fighting dragons, but it's kind of essential.
And I also think that's like what I've noticed in a lot of movies that are ported from video games, that like they focus on like the intensity and the fight scenes of the video games, but like, and I realize that's like a driving factor for a lot of people, but I think it like leaves the impression for people who aren't like the hardcore gamers who play on like consoles that that's what people who play games like take away from it. And
yeah. Uh-oh, you were making a good point and we lost you again.
I think
Hold on. We need you to back up here.
it's kind of missing the point as a game.
We need you to back
Can
up
you
there.
hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah, you went full robot. You never go full robot. You just glitched in the matrix pretty hard.
Okay. So basically what I was saying is I think that movies that are based on video games miss the point because they capture like the darkness and the action and the intensity, which is there, but isn't necessarily the driving force behind why we play the game. Like I'm thinking of the new Assassin's Creed movie specifically, where it's like it just seems really gritty and weird.
Yeah.
And it's making all these, at least in the trailer, and it's making all these points about like how he's getting hooked up to a machine and stuff that's like just not really there in the video game.
Right.
Which is actually why I think of like, when I think of a movie franchise that represents video games well, I would actually say Star Wars, even though obviously it's not based on a video game, just because it's taking that approach of like, there are big challenges, there's stuff to overcome, there's darkness, but it's lighthearted. People are in control of their fate, at least in so much that like they can take action against it.
Right.
And it's also, there's like this sense of whimsy where it's like, oh, but also like funny stuff happens too. And like life happens. It's not just like, oh, I'm here to like do this one thing, which is kill this evil guy. And then that's like the entire point of this 2.5 hours. It's like, no, I actually play games to like sometimes just like experience just like climbing up walls because that's fun in Assassin's Creed, and then like jumping on stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think that the people who make these movies and who don't get it, they don't play games. They look at that and go, oh, so we just make a movie about a guy. We make a movie where a guy does parkour and stabs people, and then you've got a successful movie. You know, I'm imagining 20th Century Fox and Michael Bay making like an Ocarina of Time movie. And they're going to go, okay, so he rides horses and he uses magic spells and he fights dudes with a sword, and then in the end, he kills the guy. He kills a big monster. It's great.
And he sleeps with Zelda, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Whereas the people playing it are like, no, he finds out that he's not who we thought he was. So he's right away, we've got this big theme about identity and who am I in the world. And then he gets introduced via the Deku Tree to this whole grander world around him. It's classic monomyth stuff. But it works really well. There's all these things all these stories that are in these stories that we play that get missed when they get brought to the screen because they think it's just about, oh, these losers who play video games. They just like give them some explosions, give them some scantily clad women, and ta-da, that's a video game.
Yeah, we get it. It's like,
yeah. And ironically, not ironically, going alongside that, that's most people I hear who really like critique video games have a problem with people playing video games. They don't understand that it's a storied exercise. It's a way of living out the same stories, just like we read Harry Potter because we want to be reminded that we live in a world where there's darkness and light can defeat darkness. And even though there's lots of twists and turns along the way, and video games are just a way to embody those stories, to actually play those out. And that's actually why I like games. I tend to like games that are more single-player, story-driven, more than Call of Duty. Call of Duty is fun, but it's a pretty empty experience. You know, it's not really challenging you. I know there's some bros out there who want to say that it's really, about these bigger themes, but it's really not. It's about how many dudes can you shoot as quickly as possible. And so,
I think Call of Duty Zombies 8 kind of destroyed that for me. Like, okay.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with, again, just playing a fun game. Just like there's nothing wrong with watching cartoons versus watching some Oscar-winning, art piece or something like that. But yeah, I think people a lot of times they miss the fact that it's about living this storied. Yeah, you're embodying this storied world that we live in. Sorry about that. The conference room phone decided to start ringing, and I don't know why. So yeah.
Cool. So I think we've kind of hit the main points. Do you just want to talk about what we've been playing recently, or?
I think that is a fantastic idea. So why don't you start? Because you have some things that I frankly would be embarrassed to come on a podcast and say I've been playing lately. So why don't we just get that out of the way?
Cool. Just outing me right out the gate. Yeah.
Yep.
Two things.
Yeah, we just had this really serious discussion about games as art and the stories that we live out in them. So why don't you tell us about Clash Royale?
Yeah, so the two games I've been playing most recently are Clash Royale and Plants vs. Zombies Heroes. And they're basically like mobile competitive games. Clash Royale, I think, is like one of the highest grossing apps on the App Store for a while or something. Blah, blah, blah. And they're basically just like competitive esport type things that EA via PopCap and whoever makes Clash Royale have tried to put out. And I've really enjoyed them. Clash Royale is like a quick 2-minute game. The level up is like pretty fast, and you build a deck of cards that like are your different units that you play. And there's like a mana system very similar to like Hearthstone or Magic, where it like refreshes over time and then you put your cards out. And I've enjoyed it just because it's fun. I think it's implemented in a way that's kind of exciting to me, where the freemium feels less. How do I want to put this? It feels less terrible. Yeah.
It's like it's less required.
Yeah, because like, so basically there's loot drops, and it takes time to wait for the loot to open, and you have only 4 loot slots. But you can keep playing even if all your loot slots have like been taken up. You just don't get loot as quickly. So like, I can still have fun playing the game even while I wait for the stuff. I just won't level up as fast, and so I basically pay only to level up faster. And that's okay, because like every game is matched against a ranking system. So if I'm not leveling up quickly, my ranking won't go up that fast. So I'm still playing in fair, even matches, even though I'm not like leveling up, which I really like. So like, I feel like if I wanted to, I can put in money and it will be valuable. But I don't feel like in order to continue playing the game and having fun, I need to do that. But yeah, it's definitely like a simple, quick game that's not like particularly exciting, but it's fun. I think Plants vs. Zombies is a much more interesting game in that
it's not that interesting because he just died in the middle of talking about it. Plants vs. Zombies is a more interesting game.
Plants vs. Zombies Heroes is an interesting game because it's like trying to be Hearthstone with Plants vs. Zombies, except there's like lanes where you attack and stuff. I think it falls down just because the cards and like the deck building strategy around it isn't as exciting as Hearthstone is. So it's just harder to have combos, and the way things work, it's kind of more about the strategy of what lanes you put where. And it's not quite as like, oh, these are combos I can make with my deck, which I think is really important in card games. Yeah.
Well, in trying that game in particular, I felt more like I would never play this against a human. Like, I would definitely play this against a computer because it's got really fun mechanics and fun animation and sounds, but I would never want to go like try new decks and try these strategies. Like, it just doesn't really lend itself to that.
Yeah, and I was really excited about it. Like, the first week I was having a lot of fun, but then after that I was kind of like, well, that was cool. I'm kind of done now. That was fun.
Yeah. Well, we could we could easily do a whole episode on those mobile games and the cash grabs that they are, but some of them are still really fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Well, I have been spending most of my time in Hearthstone because of that new Mean Streets of Gadgetzan expansion that is out, which has actually, I think, some of my favorite mechanics that they've put in the game so far.
And the sweetest card pack art I've ever seen.
It is fantastic. The little vault with the little dial that turns when it opens, like it is pretty great. So, yeah, I dumped a lot of time in that and a little bit of money. And I hope my wife's not listening. Yeah, it's been great. So they've got a couple. The mechanic that I've found the most interesting is the Jade Golem mechanic. So this is, you've got little cards that when you play them, they'll summon these Jade Golems, which are, for Magic players, they summon like a token. Except that the first time you play one of these cards, a 1 health, 1 attack token gets summoned. But then the second time, it'll be a 2/2, and the next time it'll be a 3 attack, 3 health, going on and on until at the end of the game. If you're playing these cards, suddenly you're dropping these 9 attack, 10 attack, these huge creatures, and so it can be a really fun deck to play. It can be really hard to play against because you're basically just got to be racing them down and try to kill them before they can drop these big guys. But it's a really fun mechanic because it's that token based mechanic, except you don't have to hopefully buff them later on. The buffs are built in.
And I think it answers a question that was kind of raised during the last expansion where there was a lot of randomness that was literally just like roll a dice or like play a random card, which is like, I think based on what I've like experienced in Magic, it's just like it's a harder type of randomness to enjoy because as a player you don't feel like you have control over it.
Yeah.
Whereas Jade Golems is still random, right? Like it depends on if you draw all the right cards and if it's in the right order, but you can build your deck around that, and you don't feel like you're just like once you play the card that you don't have any control over what happens.
Right.
And I think it's a great implementation of like, oh, this is something we could really only handle with a computer game elegantly, and it still like brings in that sort of randomness that card games need to really be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, but even playing against it, it's nice because there's a level of predictability. You now know, like pretty early on, you know what your opponent's playing, like what his strategy is, and you can predict, right? Because there's no cards that like buff, oh, make your next Jade Golem bigger. That doesn't exist. So you always know, great, he just summoned a 2/2, so I need to be prepared for something plus a 3/3 minion to land on board. So there's a level of planning that you get with that I really enjoy. And yeah, I think they've done a really good job with this expansion. Some of the other mechanics like buffing minions while they're still in your hand is kind of cool because all of a sudden you're dropping for low cost, you're dropping minions that are bigger than they have business being. And so that is really fun. And yeah, it's been a really enjoyable. I've had less rage moments than I was with the previous expansion where, yeah, it was just, guy played one mana card that gave him the most powerful spell in the game. So it's just like it generated so much value for nothing because he rolled high basically.
Yeah, and like even Cthulhu, which was like, mostly not random, there were still times where it's like, well, if this all goes to his face, I win, or if it like kills all of his guys, I win.
Yeah.
But then like sometimes you just end up with like, oh, all of his guys are at 1 and he's at 2. Guess I lose. That was fun.
Yeah.
Where it's like at some point you want it to just be some level of predictability.
Exactly. I will say my other favorite thing about the Jade Golems, though, is that the artwork changes. So, like, they're kind of just look like these like jade statues for the first few that get summoned, and then once they hit 4 power, they kind of get a little more animated looking, like they're actually holding a weapon. And then once they cross like the 7, I think, power threshold, they look different again. And then after 10, they're just like these monsters. So I love that there was this attention to detail there of actually changing the way they look as they get bigger throughout the game.
Yeah, it's just like cool stuff like that differentiates playing a computer card, like table game versus like just a regular old board game style. Yeah. And the other thing I will say about that expansion was the like multi-class cards.
Yeah.
I think that's something that probably doesn't look the most impressive right now just because the cards they printed aren't like game breaking or anything, but it opens up design space in a very specific way for them in the future.
Yeah.
That says, okay, we're not just going to like go crazy, but we're sort of tying these different classes together so they're related.
Yeah.
And in the future, we can kind of explore this in interesting ways.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes what they've run into in the past is they'll have a neutral card, meaning any of the classes in the game can use it. And it turns out that card is just broken in Mage or in Druid or something. Like this card is just so overpowered in this one particular class. They can actually design around that. They can go, we want to print this cool card, and we're just going to make it a tri-class so that it's excluded from what's going to be like the problem classes for it. Because maybe it would just be too broken in Mage and Priest, so it's the other tri-class. They can't use it. So I think that opens up a lot of potential for them. So we're getting close to the 45-minute mark, and I think we should shut this thing down.
Yeah, I agree. Cool.
I mean, delete it, burn it down, not even going to release it.
That's what they always say at Galvanize, right? Just burn it down and do it again.
Yeah. Stu, where can people find you on the internet?
Oh, that is a great question. Currently, I am fairly uneasy to find, but you can find some of my work at urbac.net. And that'll be in the show notes as well, if we have them.
We do.
Cool.
Well, you can always find me rambling about nothing in particular on Twitter at Sean M. Bragg. It's BRAGE at the end there. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for this episode of The Main Loop. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. And we hope to hear from you all then.
Cool.